Hello. F. Bruce was a Plymouth Brethren-born scholar, one of the greatest New Testament scholars of the last generation. He remained Plymouth Brethren till his death, which makes him, as far as I know, the one great Brethren scholar of the last century, who has been indisputably received and commemorated by the international scholarly community. He wrote this book, Hard Sayings of Jesus, some 30 years ago, and toward the end of his life. And in it, he takes on, of course, one of the toughest points for ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, and I would say present Jehovah's Witnesses, to deal with, namely the this generation prophecy, which has proved to be such a heavy weight around the necks of the Watchtower over the last, 150 years almost now. Here's what he says about this generation shall not pass away, a text that is found in the last days accounts in the Synoptic Gospels. The one that, of course, most witnesses are aware of is the one in Matthew 24. This is what Bruce says about it. This generation is a recurring phrase in the Bible, and each time it is used, it bears the ordinary sense of the people belonging, as we say, to one fairly comprehensive age group. One desperate attempt to combine the recognition of this fact with a reference to the second advent in the text we are considering, and yet exonerate Jesus from being mistaken in his forecast, is to take this generation and mean not this generation now alive, but the generation which will be alive at the time about which I am speaking. The meaning would then be the generation on earth when these things begin to take place will still be on earth when they are all completed. All these things will take place within the span of one generation. That's a direct quote from another Brethren scholar, by the way. Bruce says, is this at all probable? I think not. When we are faced with the problem of understanding a hard saying, it's always a safe procedure to ask, what would it have meant to the people who first heard it? And there can be but one answer to this question in relation to the present hard saying. Jesus' hearers would have understood him to mean only that all these things would take place within their generation. Not only does generation in the phrase this generation always mean the people alive at one particular time, the phrase itself always means the generation now living. Jesus spoke of this generation in this sense several times, and generally in no flattering terms. In fact, his use of the phrase echoes its use in the Old Testament records of the Israelites' wilderness wanderings. The generation of Israelites that left Egypt did not survive to enter Canaan. It died out in the wilderness. All the adults, that is to say, with two named exceptions. And why? Because it refused to accept the word of God communicated through Moses. Hence it is called this evil generation, Deuteronomy 1:35. A perverse and crooked generation, Deuteronomy 32:5. Bruce goes on to say, similarly, the generation to which Jesus ministered is called an evil generation, Luke 11:29. This adulterous and sinful generation, Mark 8:38, because of its unbelief and unresponsiveness. The men of Nineveh, said Jesus, will arise at the judgment with this generation and condemn it, for they repented at the preaching of Jonah. And behold, something greater than Jonah is here. Luke 11:32. In fact, this generation has so capped the unhappy record of its predecessors that all their misdeeds will be visited on it. Yes, I tell you, it shall be required of this generation. Luke 11:51. The phrase this generation is found too often on Jesus' lips in this literal sense for us to suppose that it suddenly takes on a different meaning in the saying which we are now examining. Moreover, if the generation of the end time had been intended, that generation would have been a more natural way of referring to it than this generation. So F. Bruce obviously believes that there's no way around the fact that this generation means the living generation that heard the words. But doesn't this mean that Jesus is a false prophet then? Well, obviously Matthew and Mark didn't think so, or they wouldn't have included this reference as somehow a proof of Jesus being Messiah. And neither did the copyists who copied the Gospels of Mark and Matthew to succeeding generations. They didn't think of it as indicating Jesus was guilty of false prophecies. But that's a subject for another video. By the way, one extra point. F.F. Bruce, the author of The Hard Sayings of Jesus, was, as I said, a brethren to the day of his death. He died in his 80s, in the year 1990. He attended a brethren assembly in Stockport, my hometown. But that's not the reason. I revere F.F. Bruce. Many of his books have blessed me and many other Christians over the last 2 to 3 generations. F.F. Bruce, The Hard Sayings of Jesus.